She looked me dead in the eyes, car keys already in her hand, and said, "This is a family night, Gerald, you stay here." Then she walked out. I was still holding a dish towel. I didn't argue, didn't chase her down the driveway, didn't even raise my voice. I just stood in that kitchen, in Decatur, Georgia, on a warm October Friday, and I finally heard her clearly, maybe for the first time in 8 years of marriage. Because the dinner she was heading to, the one I wasn't welcome at, my name was probably still on the credit card they'd be running at the end of the night. I need you to stay with me through this story. Because it doesn't start with a fight. It doesn't start with screaming or lawyers or a dramatic confrontation in a parking lot. It starts with one woman saying stay home to a man who had spent nearly a decade making sure she had somewhere to come back to. And it ends with that same man finally understanding that being needed and being valued are two entirely different things. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I'm 58 years old. I own a small commercial property on the east side of Atlanta that most people in my wife's family always called that old warehouse of Gerald's like it was a hobby, like it was clutter. I had met Vanessa at a mutual friend's cookout in Cascade Heights back in 2016, and within 2 years we were married. She had a son from her first marriage named Darius, 34 years old at the time of this story. Tall, charming when he needed to be, and someone I had spent years quietly helping in ways I never asked him to acknowledge. The dinner was at Bones Restaurant on Piedmont Road. Private dining room. The occasion was Darius getting promoted to Regional Operations Director at a shipping company up in Alpharetta. And I want to be clear, I was proud of him. Genuinely. I had watched that young man stumble through 2 job losses, a divorce, and a period where he was calling me at 11 at night, unsure whether he could make rent. I had been there for those calls. I answered every single one. But I also knew who else would be at Bones that Friday night. Marcus. Vanessa's ex-husband. Darius's biological father. The man who had left Vanessa not once but twice before she met me, borrowed money from her aunt that was never paid back, and somehow still walked into every family gathering like he was returning from a heroic expedition, rather than from wherever he'd been hiding when the difficult years were happening. I dried my hands on the dish towel and asked Vanessa who exactly was going. She listed them the way you read a grocery receipt. Darius and his girlfriend Simone, her sister Carol, their cousin Patrice, and Marcus. I said, "Marcus." She said, "He's Darius's father, Gerald." I said, "And what am I?" She didn't answer right away. She checked her reflection in the microwave door, and I want you to notice that detail, because it tells you everything. She was thinking about how she looked, not about what she'd just said to me. Then she sighed in that way she had. Not frustrated, not guilty, tired. Like I was a problem she kept forgetting to solve. She said Marcus being there made things complicated. That Darius wanted one night without any tension. I asked if Marcus's girlfriend was coming too. She looked away. I already knew. But sometimes you ask a question just to give the person you love one last chance to tell the truth voluntarily. "Yes," she said, "Cheryl's coming." I stood there processing that for a moment. Marcus's girlfriend had a seat at the table. I didn't. I had helped Darius draft his resume after his divorce wrecked his confidence. I had introduced him to my former colleague Raymond at a barbecue 2 years ago, the same Raymond who now worked in operations at the company where Darius had just been promoted. I had written him a professional reference letter. I had been on FaceTime with him the night before, 2 separate job interviews, running practice questions until we were both yawning. None of that had apparently earned me a chair at Bones Restaurant. I looked past Vanessa toward the refrigerator. Through the glass, I could see a container on the middle shelf. Masking tape across the lid. Someone had written D's casserole in blue marker. Even the leftovers had his name on them. Vanessa followed my eyes, and I think in that moment she might have felt something like embarrassment, or at least the beginning of it. But with Vanessa, embarrassment didn't come out soft. It came out sharp. She picked up her keys and said, "This is family time. You stay home." Just like that. Not thrown. Not screamed. Set down on the counter between us like a practical decision, like something reasonable. I thought about the first Christmas after we got married. Her sister Carol had pulled everyone into the living room for a group photo, then smiled at me and said, "Let's get one with just the family first, and then we'll grab you. Just the family." I had walked to the kitchen and pretended to check on something in the oven so no one would see my expression. I thought about the fence I repaired at Vanessa's mother's house in 90-degree heat in July. The credit card debt I helped Vanessa pay down before we bought the house. The month I quietly covered Darius's truck payment when Simone lost hours at work. The birthday cards with my name written in different handwriting than everyone else's. The church friends who still introduced me as Vanessa's husband, with a small pause before the word, like they were still deciding if it counted. I had been useful for 8 years, included when it was convenient, invisible when it wasn't. Vanessa waited for me to argue. I could feel it in the way she held her shoulders. She had already prepared for the version of me that said, "Come on, Vanessa. That's not right." After everything I've done, she had her response ready. I didn't give her the chance to use it. I folded the dish towel and set it neatly beside the sink. "Okay," I said. Her forehead tightened. One word. No chair scraping, no raised voice, no speech about respect or what a man deserves in his own home. Just, okay. And I meant it. Not in the way of someone backing down, in the way of someone who has just made a decision so final it doesn't require announcement. She stared at me for a moment like I had started speaking a foreign language. Then she shook her head and walked down the hallway. I heard her heels on the hardwood. The garage door groaned open. Her car backed out. The house settled into that specific suburban quiet that follows someone leaving in anger they're pretending isn't anger. I stood in the kitchen for a while. The refrigerator hummed, steady, indifferent, like nothing had just cracked open inside the walls of this house. Then I went upstairs. Honestly, if you'd asked me that morning whether I was the kind of man who would leave, I don't know what I would have told you. I thought I was patient. I thought patience was love. But there's a version of patience that's really just avoidance, dressed up in virtue, and that night, standing in the closet pulling suitcases from behind Vanessa's winter coats, I understood the difference. I packed like I was leaving for a business trip. 3 pairs of jeans, 4 shirts, my medication, my shaving kit, the folder of property documents from my desk drawer, my passport, my father's pocket watch, a framed photo of my daughter Renee from her nursing school graduation, one arm hooked around my neck, her smile so bright it almost made you forget the 4 years of sacrifice behind it. I left most things behind. Not because they didn't matter, because if I had started picking up every object with a memory attached, I might have sat down on the bedroom floor and not been able to stand back up. At 8:30 that evening, I made 3 phone calls. First, to a Marriott near Peachtree City 2 nights. Second, to my attorney, Diane Okafor. She's in her early 60s, sharp as a paper cut, and constitutionally incapable of pretending foolishness is anything other than foolishness. I got her voicemail and left a message that probably sounded calmer than I felt. Third, to the bank. I asked what the process looked like for reviewing joint account activity and beginning a legal separation of automatic payments. The woman on the phone paused when I said legal separation. Then her voice went softer. I hated that, the pity in it, but I thanked her and hung up. I set my wedding ring on the kitchen counter. Then my phone buzzed. Vanessa had sent a photo. Everyone smiling. Darius in the center, Simone leaning into him, Carol holding a wine glass, Marcus standing behind Darius with his hand on the boy's shoulder like a man claiming a legacy he had barely participated in building. Cheryl was there too, red blouse, big smile. Right at the table. I zoomed in before I could stop myself. Near Vanessa's purse, at the edge of the frame, I could see the black check folder sitting on the table. Something went quiet inside me. Not peaceful quiet, the quiet you feel when you already know the answer to a question, and you're just waiting for the math to confirm it. I picked up my suitcase, turned off the kitchen light, and walked out through the garage. By the time Vanessa came home that night laughing into her phone, I was already in a hotel room off the interstate, and I had already decided I was finished being the man they set aside until the bill came due. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and stale coffee. I sat on the edge of the bed without taking my shoes off for a long time. People imagine that leaving feels dramatic, empowering, like a movie moment. Mostly, it felt disorienting. I was 58 years old, sitting alone on a Marriott bedspread because my wife told me to stay home and eat her son's leftovers. When you say it out loud in your own head, it sounds almost funny. Until it doesn't. I turned on the television, sports highlights. I turned it off. Outside the window, the interstate hummed. Somebody on the floor below me laughed loudly. Somewhere a door slammed. Life continuing, completely unbothered, while mine had just rearranged itself around a dish towel and a single word. I called Renee around 10:30. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Daddy." Just that. Just her voice. Something in my chest loosened. I told her I was at a hotel. There was a pause on her end, not shocked. Something worse. The kind of pause that says, finally. She asked quietly whether Vanessa had hurt me. or whether she had just finally said out loud what she'd been doing for years. I stared at the carpet. She told me I wasn't family enough for a dinner celebrating a man I helped get promoted. Renee exhaled slowly through her nose. Daddy. She has spent 8 years treating you like the emergency contact they call after the real people aren't available. I almost defended Vanessa out of habit. I actually had to stop myself mid-thought. That's how deep the reflex went even then. Sitting alone in a hotel room with my wedding ring sitting on my kitchen counter 40 minutes away, my first instinct was to explain her behavior to my own daughter. Renee said, "You know what the worst part is? You always understand why she does what she does better than she understands it herself." That landed hard enough that I didn't respond for a moment. "I got that from your grandmother," I finally said. She said, "You got it from watching people overlook you for so long you learned to do it for them." We talked for another 20 minutes. Nothing heavy after that. She told me about a patient who had tried to flirt with her while wearing a neck brace, and I told her the hotel coffee probably required a medical waiver. But before we hung up, she said, "I'm not telling you to blow your life up, Daddy. I'm telling you not to keep living in a house where people treat you like load-bearing furniture. Furniture. Useful. Structural. Expected to stay exactly where you're placed and hold weight without complaint." I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time after that. At 11:20, Vanessa called. I watched her name light up the screen. I did not answer. 30 seconds later, a text from Darius. "Mom says you're being weird. Please don't make tonight about yourself." I read that sentence 3 times. Then I set the phone face down on the nightstand. At 58, you learn that not every message deserves the dignity of a response. Morning came in pieces. At 6:45, I gave up pretending I was sleeping. The hotel breakfast area was already half full, a retired couple in matching University of Georgia gear, arguing softly about whether the GPS had been wrong yesterday. Watching them bicker with the easy familiarity of people who have navigated enough arguments to stop being afraid of them that should have comforted me somehow. It mostly just made me feel like I was watching life through glass. I met with Diane at her office near Buckhead at 9 a.m. She shook my hand firmly and looked me up and down without ceremony. "You look like you slept in a Marriott," she said. I did. "Fair enough. Sit down." Diane listened without interrupting while I laid out all of it. The dinner. The exclusion. Marcus's girlfriend getting a seat I wasn't offered. The hotel. All of it. When I finished, she folded her hands. She gave me 4 rules. Don't threaten Vanessa. Don't move money from joint accounts without documentation. Write everything down. Don't go back to the house alone if things escalate. Then she asked about assets. I mentioned the warehouse property on the east side. I had purchased it in 2012, before the Beltline development pushed property values in that corridor to levels nobody had predicted. 2 years into the marriage, with Diane's help, I had placed it into a revocable trust. A medical supply company leased the front half. A developer had been circling it for months with a serious offer that, if it closed, would represent a number Vanessa had never once asked about because she had always assumed it was just a dusty old building I was sentimentally attached to. Diane raised one eyebrow. Does she know what it's worth? She thinks it's storage. Diane made a small sound, not quite a laugh. That misconception is going to become very emotionally significant. When I left her office, I sat in my truck and opened the joint account app on my phone. There it was. Bones Restaurant. $4,917. Private dining room. Full dinner service. Premium alcohol. The family celebration I wasn't welcome at had been charged to the account I primarily funded. I stared at the number for a long time, then I took a screenshot and sent it to Diane. Here's the thing nobody tells you about a moment like that. I didn't feel rage. I felt something almost like clarity. The hurt had already happened. This was just the receipt. And for the first time in days, the whole situation stopped feeling like an emotional crisis and started feeling like arithmetic. Saturday morning, I drove back to the house. The neighborhood looked exactly the same, sprinklers ticking across green lawns, someone's kid washing a car in the driveway, a golden retriever being walked by a woman in yoga pants who waved like everything in the world was fine. You can be completely falling apart while the subdivision runs its normal Saturday programming. I sat in the truck in my own driveway for almost a full minute before I got out. Vanessa was in the kitchen in leggings and an old sweatshirt, coffee in hand, hair untwisted and half loose like she hadn't slept well either. For 1 second, just one, seeing her standing there in that familiar morning light softness almost reset everything. That's the dangerous thing about long marriages. Familiarity can disguise damage if you're not careful. She looked up and said, "You embarrassed me. Not where did you go? Not are you okay? Just, you embarrassed me." I set my keys on the counter. "Good morning to you too." She said I had disappeared like a teenager. I said I wasn't invited. She said Darius needed one peaceful night. I opened the refrigerator and grabbed a water bottle. The casserole was still there, untouched. I told her the dinner cost nearly $5,000. Her eyes narrowed fast. She said it was Darius's night, and I shouldn't be nickel and diming family. I took a slow drink of water before I answered. Funny thing about that word. Family. I was told I wasn't family enough to sit at the table, but I was apparently family enough to pay for it. The sentence hung between us. She looked away first. That silence told the truth more honestly than either of us could have. Vanessa turned toward the sink. She said I always did this, took one uncomfortable situation and made it into a moral crisis. I thought about 8 years of quietly absorbing things I should have named out loud. I thought about every birthday card where my name appeared in slightly different handwriting than everyone else's. I thought about every time someone at a family gathering introduced me as Vanessa's husband with that small pause before the word. One uncomfortable situation. Before I could answer, her phone buzzed on the counter. Her sister Carol. Vanessa hit speaker by reflex before she thought about it. Carol's voice filled the kitchen. "So did Gerald eat his little leftovers, or is he still sulking somewhere?" Everything froze. Vanessa grabbed for the phone. Too slow. Carol kept going. "I swear that man acts like everybody owes him a parade just because he signs a check." Vanessa snatched it up. Carol stopped. Silence. Then, that small, reflexive, not nearly embarrassed enough, did something to me I can't fully explain. It wasn't even the insult. It was how casual it was, how practiced. Like this was not the first time they had spoken about me this way. Like I was a recurring topic in a conversation I was never meant to hear. I picked up my folder from the kitchen chair. Vanessa started to say my name. I was already at the garage door. I stopped with my hand on the frame. Didn't turn around. "You know what I spent 8 years believing," I said quietly, "that if I helped enough people in this family, eventually I'd feel like I belonged in it." Then I walked out before she could answer. I ended up in a Publix parking lot off Memorial Drive, engine off, staring through the windshield at people pushing shopping carts through October sunlight, an old man loading cantaloupes into the back of a Tahoe, a mother wiping her toddler's nose, 2 teenagers debating something near the entrance, gesturing wildly, laughing. And I sat there in that parking lot and I cried. Not loudly, not with any drama, just quiet tears sliding down my face while I stared at the steering wheel, feeling embarrassed even though no one could see me. At 58, humiliation hits differently than it does when you're young. It's not just the hurt, it's the fury at yourself for having tolerated the conditions that made the hurt possible. My phone buzzed around noon. Raymond Osei, the man I had introduced Darius to at a barbecue 2 years earlier. He asked if I had a moment. He told me he'd been at a department meeting the day before, that Darius had been talking about his career path, his mentors, the people who had opened doors for him, and that Darius had credited Marcus. I stared through the windshield. Specifically, said Marcus was the reason he had the connections he needed. Said Marcus guided him. I sat with that for a moment. Marcus. The man who had been largely absent while the difficult years were happening. The man who had not written a reference letter, had not run practice interview questions at midnight, had not introduced Darius to anyone in the industry. Marcus, who had shown up once things were going well and allowed credit to accumulate around him, like weather. Raymond cleared his throat. "There's also a recognition brunch tomorrow morning at a club in Buckhead, family and mentors invited." I asked if Marcus was going. "He's on the list," Raymond said, "guest of honor side." I thanked Raymond and hung up. Then I sat in that parking lot for another 10 minutes staring at my own reflection in the windshield and understanding, fully, what had been happening. The leftovers had never really been the point. The point was that somewhere along the way, I had become replaceable in this marriage while remaining indispensable to its finances. And the people I had spent 8 years quietly building a life around had come to see those two things as perfectly compatible. By Sunday morning, I was sitting in the parking lot of the club in Buckhead with both hands on the steering wheel and the engine still running. I want to be honest with you, I almost drove away twice. Twice. Part of me wanted to find a diner somewhere, order eggs, and let the whole thing go. Let Marcus have the credit. Let Darius have his narrative. Let Vanessa have her version of events. The part of me that had been patient for 8 years thought, maybe this is the graceful exit. Quiet dignity, no scene. But then I thought about Raymond's voice on the phone. And the dinner receipt. And Carol's casual laughing cruelty floating out of that speakerphone. And the casserole with Darius's name on the masking tape. I turned off the engine and went inside. The club smelled like maple syrup and fresh linen and money spent quietly. Men in blazers, women in church-adjacent dresses. Mimosas on white tablecloths. The kind of room where people say difficult things with very pleasant expressions. Vanessa saw me the moment I walked through the double doors. She crossed the room fast. Gerald. Her voice was a whisper with a blade inside it. What are you doing here? I looked around the room. Having brunch, apparently. Her jaw tightened. Across the room, Marcus stood near the bar with the easy posture of a man who has never once questioned whether he deserved to be somewhere. Silver hair. Good suit. The grin that older men get when the world keeps forgiving them for things that mattered. Carol spotted me. Her eyes went wide with the particular excitement of someone who has just realized they have a front row seat to something. Darius noticed me from across the room. His shoulders dropped. Not guilt, annoyance. That hurt more than the dinner. I took a seat near the back by a window overlooking the 18th hole. A server poured coffee without asking. The room buzzed and settled. The event began. Darius's manager, a woman named Paula Hendricks, mid-40s, sharp-eyed and professional, welcomed everyone and spoke about leadership development and organizational growth. She invited Darius to say a few words. He stood. He thanked his team. He thanked Simone. He thanked his mother. Then he looked toward Marcus and said, "Honestly, I wouldn't be standing here without this man opening doors for me when I needed direction." Marcus gave a modest nod. The room applauded. My stomach turned. Not because I needed public credit. I want to be clear about that. I had never done any of it for acknowledgement. I had done it because I thought that was what family meant. You show up in the hard seasons, no announcement necessary. But hearing another man accept credit for your labor is its own particular kind of loss. It doesn't just hurt your pride. It rewrites the story of a relationship. It makes the sacrifices feel retroactively foolish. Paula smiled and invited mentors and family to gather for a group photo. Marcus stepped forward immediately. Raymond cleared his throat. His voice was measured but loud enough for the room. Actually, Gerald should probably be in that photo too. Silence. The kind that spreads slowly, table by table, like a weather system moving in. Paula looked confused. "I'm sorry?" Raymond said calmly. Gerald introduced Darius to our operations team. He also wrote the professional recommendation that opened the door. A manager near the front nodded. I remember that email. Marcus's smile didn't disappear, but something behind it did. Darius looked at the floor. Vanessa closed her eyes briefly, just for a second, like she was calculating the damage. I stood slowly. My legs felt heavier than they should have. "I didn't come here for a photo," I said. Nobody moved. The room had gone very still, not dramatically, just in the way of people who sense something real happening in a space designed for performance. "I came here because I am finished standing quietly while someone else wears credit for work I did, after being told I didn't belong at the table." The room tightened. I could feel it, that specific human discomfort when something unspoken finally gets said in public. Vanessa hissed, "Gerald, stop." I looked at Darius instead. His face had gone through 3 expressions in 4 seconds. "I helped you," I said, "because I believe that's what family does. Not because I needed recognition. Because I genuinely wanted to see you succeed." I paused. "But family doesn't charge dinner to your account while telling you you're not invited." A woman near the front shifted in her chair. Someone set down a mimosa glass very carefully. Marcus stepped forward with both hands slightly raised. Now, everyone contributed in their own way. Raymond looked directly at him. "That's not what Darius told the department." The room went quieter still. Marcus stopped smiling completely. For the first time since I had known him, he looked uncertain, and I don't mind telling you I felt no satisfaction in that. Just a strange, settled sadness. Carol, unable to survive silence longer than 30 seconds, snapped. "This is absolutely ridiculous. It was one dinner. He's acting like we committed a crime." I turned toward her. "No, Carol," I said evenly. "If it were a crime, at least there'd be a proper investigation." 2 people laughed before they could stop themselves. Carol's mouth dropped open. Even Paula seemed to almost smile before reassembling her professional expression. The tension cracked, not resolved, just fractured enough for the embarrassment underneath to flood in. Darius pressed both palms over his face. "You're humiliating us," he said quietly. I looked at him steadily. "No, Darius. I'm being honest about an arrangement everyone agreed to pretend was something else." That landed. I could see it land. Because it was true, and truth, spoken plainly, has a sound that's different from argument. It doesn't echo. It settles. Paula stepped close to Darius and lowered her voice to what corporations call a professional register, pleasant words carrying genuine consequences. She said the company would need to revisit the mentorship documentation internally. Darius went pale. Marcus found his coffee cup extremely interesting. Vanessa looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, fury and panic braided together, and underneath both of them, something that looked almost like recognition. I picked up my folder. "I'm done here," I said quietly. I walked through the banquet room, past the bacon and the biscuits and the golf trophies in glass cases, past the people pretending not to stare. Outside, the October sun hit me immediately warm, bright, indifferent to everything that had just happened inside. I had almost reached my truck when Vanessa came through the door behind me, heels sharp on the pavement. "Gerald." Her voice was different now, lower. I stopped, didn't turn fully. "Do you have any idea what you just did in there?" I looked at her. "Yes," I said. "I corrected the guest list." She stared at me like she was seeing someone she didn't recognize. And maybe she was, because the man who had folded dish towels and said okay and eaten the silence for 8 years had apparently left somewhere between the hotel room and this parking lot. My phone buzzed. Diane. Vanessa had called a locksmith. I looked up slowly from the screen, and for the first time since Friday night, Vanessa didn't look angry. She looked scared, because somewhere between the leftovers and the brunch and the receipt and the parking lot tears, she had arrived at a realization she had never actually prepared for. I was willing to leave. The locksmith situation resolved itself the way most things do when an attorney is involved and a patrol officer is standing in the driveway looking tired. I retrieved what I needed. I was calm. The locksmith practically sprinted back to his van. I understood completely. Vanessa followed me upstairs while I packed a second bag. She said I was throwing away 8 years over one dinner. I said I wasn't leaving over one dinner. I was finally responding to 8 years of them. She asked what would happen with the property. And there it was. Not "Do you still love me?" Not "Is there any way back?" The warehouse. I told her the trust was handling the property. She looked like the ground had shifted underneath her. She said I had been hiding money. I said I had been protecting an asset I built before she knew my name, while she had been assuming I would always be too invested in belonging to ever actually leave. Darius called that evening. He was angry at first. Then he ran out of anger. Then he said something unexpected. "I didn't think it would matter to you this much." I sat very still. "That's the problem," I said. "It mattered to me the entire time." A long silence. "I'm sorry," he said. Not dramatic, not a speech, just 2 words from a young man who had run out of ways to defend the indefensible and landed, finally, on something true. I told him that I had once thought of him like a son, that I hoped he wouldn't let one convenient lie become the thing that defined him. We hung up without resolution, but without cruelty either. Sometimes that's the best available outcome. 6 weeks later, I moved into a townhouse near East Atlanta Village. Small, quiet, close to a walking trail and a breakfast spot called Maisie's, where the woman behind the counter learned my order by the 3rd morning and just started pouring my coffee when she saw me walk in. Such a small thing. Being recognized without having to announce yourself. The warehouse sale closed the following spring. I paid legal fees. I helped Renee with a down payment on her place in Smyrna. I contributed to a trade program for young people who needed a second start. Nothing flashy. Nothing that required anyone's applause. If you've ever been in a room full of people and still felt completely alone. If you've ever been the one who fixed things, funded things, showed up for things, and still somehow ended up on the outside of the photo, then I think you already understood this story before I finished telling it. The leftovers were never the real insult. The real insult was the quiet, accumulated assumption that I would always prioritize their comfort over my own dignity. That patience could be stretched indefinitely without consequence. That a man who doesn't yell doesn't mean it. I mean it. The thing this whole experience taught me is that being needed and being valued are not the same thing. Not even close. And the mistake most people in situations like mine make is waiting for the other person to notice the difference on their own. They won't. Not until the cost of your absence becomes real to them, and by then, you've already paid too high a price in the waiting. Here's the question I want you to sit with tonight. Is there somewhere in your own life where you have been teaching someone that your tolerance is the same as your approval? Because those two things feel identical until the day you finally stop. Comment 1 if you think Gerald handled this the right way. Comment 2 if you think he should have spoken up earlier. Comment 3 if some part of this story felt a little too familiar. I read every single comment, and I want to know which number you're landing on tonight. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? What time is it where you are? Because people all over the world are listening to stories like this one at 2 a.m. when they can't sleep, and they need to know someone else understands. If that's you tonight, I'm glad you found this. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. New stories go up every week. I'll be here. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences. Fully rewritten and reimagined in Atlanta, Georgia to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is entirely coincidental.